proselytizing remains a major tenet of all the world's principal religions even to this day, asserting that subscribers to religion have a duty to try to convince as many people to subscribe to their religion and believe in their particular God as possible. And of course, what most don't realize is that they also have an obligation to lop off the head of anybody that doesn't buy into the story. And we see that happening, of course, in the Middle East these days. But it's also a tenet of the Christian religion, and now we're seeing it here in Hillsborough County, which is the major county of the Tampa Bay area here in Florida, in our public school systems. I'm Ed Golly on the Atheist Forum. I'm joined on the set by Joe Reinhardt, my co-host, and we're going to talk about some of the efforts that some of these mega churches are making to infiltrate the public school system. Now, they do it under the disguise of helping to mentor students and to help as teachers' aides. But we all know what's really behind this. It's always the same old story. They're trying to get these kids by the throat, drag them into the religion, and get them to be lifetime believers and contributors to the hat when it's passed at the Sunday services. So, Joe, we saw in the Hillsborough County system a fellow who actually had 2 criminal convictions, who was going into the sporting arenas, into the locker rooms, and engaging in leading prayers for the students and convincing or trying to convince them they should subscribe to Christianity and so on. And he was just doing this on a regular basis without having gone through the normal background checks that are required of people who are just citizens unrelated to the school system getting in and communicating with students. And it took somebody complaining to a national organization called the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is up in Madison, Wisconsin, to then bring this to the attention of the public school board and throw this guy out, essentially. So we see that the school board really wasn't paying much attention to who's coming in, as long as they're advocating Christianity, because of this underlying assumption that people who are Christians are always honest, decent, good, law-abiding, flag-waving Americans, and those of us who don't subscribe, those of us who are members of the community of reason, are those who should never be trusted, those who have nefarious intent, those of us who have no ethics or morals and are irresponsible and untrustworthy people. I don't have any criminal convictions. But anyway, Joe, help us out with some of these tenets of religion that really tell us that it is our natural obligation as members of the religion to spread the gospel, to drag in as many people as we can, and as it says in the Bible and the Quran, if they don't subscribe, they should be put to death.
Yes, they should, as a matter of fact. Well, there's a lot of points to cover.
Well, that would be us then, Joe.
Your name's at the top of the list,
okay.
Ed.
I knew it was important somewhere.
But there are a lot of points to cover from your opening. And one is that, of course, the all religions are interested in getting out their message to children. The younger, the better. I think it's the Jesuits who said that, give me the child, I'll give you the man. And it's very difficult to unlearn those things that children are taught at their earliest age. And by the same token, if you look at a graph among believers and skeptics, the older the person is when they're introduced to religion, the percentage who actually believe the stories falls off rapidly with age. So every religion thinks it's essential to get to young children and bring them into the fold, so to speak, not just to save their souls, but also to keep the religion vibrant and growing, because every religion is in fact parasitic. They don't produce anything. They're basically just some sort of combination of a Ponzi scheme, a pyramid plan, and a franchise. You build yourself a church, call it the First Baptist Church at Don't Come Back, Tennessee, and we'll send you all the Baptists in your part of town, and you pay us a percentage of your take, and we own the real estate. They all have what are, in essence, franchise arrangements, which is fine. They're welcome to do that. But I don't think they would need to be spending as much time out mentoring students and attempting to help out the school system, quotation marks, if they would pay some of the hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes that they illegally avoid. And in the state of Florida, in fact, unconstitutionally avoid paying taxes in the state of Florida. The public schools and many other public agencies wouldn't be as desperate for funds, and they wouldn't need the charity that the church doles out if the churches and religion paid their taxes in the first place. So there are a lot of, as I said, points to cover, but the one that I'll deal with last now is the Great Commission. It's the last, the last chapter of the book of Matthew, Matthew 28:16-20, where it specifically tells Christians to go out into the land, teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. So there it is, Jesus himself, who ought to know better. Jesus ought to know that you can't get two people to agree on the subject of religion, let alone 7 billion, and the amount of friction and suffering that it would cause to try to get everyone of the same mind on that subject. But nevertheless, here it is in the last chapter of Matthew. Get out there and get these people and get them signed up and get them paying dues, or tithing, and we can swell our coffers and our political influence and all of the other things that come with safety in numbers if we do that. And so that's basically what the idea is, and that's why people are out banging on your doors. They're really looking to make things better in the hereafter.
So let's face it,
for you,
Joe,
and the here and now for themselves. Yes,
a child under 6 years old can be convinced that there's a jolly, obese man who lives in the North Pole who can somehow visit every house in the world on one night and believe in things like angels and fairies. So what chance does a kid like that have, or any child, in challenging these religious concepts that into which they are indoctrinated, dealing with gods and angels and afterlife and so on? That's why it's so important to get them when they're younger. I think you would agree, Joe, because that's when the mind is malleable. They can't question these things, and so as they get older, of course, they can, but they still will set that mindset in place that I just had this conversation about a week ago, that it takes more faith to subscribe to evolution than it does to religion or to Christianity. And that's because they don't ever understand what it's all about. They don't realize that it's not a guess that all life on Earth is related, whether we're talking about other primates, earthworms, or even oak trees. The DNA science proves it. So it's not a theory in the sense that it's a wild guess. Same applies to the age of the Earth and how humanity came about. We understand those things, but the religious person is convinced that, oh no, it's just a wild guess, and it actually has less of a foundation than picking up a book written by people who thought the world is flat, had no idea what a germ or fire was, what the atmosphere was, what a star was, or had ever heard of a Carter's little liver pill. And somehow they guessed right just because they wrote it down a long time ago. That's where it takes a lot of faith to subscribe to it. I mean, come on. The first man made out of a pile of mud? You got to be kidding me. Anyway, getting into our schools, though, which is why these mega churches want to infiltrate the schools and start selling their message to students. And of course, another factor is that they know that there are a lot of kids come from broken families. A lot of kids don't have a lot of parental support, so they too are vulnerable. But they go back to an act that was passed in 1984 called the Equal Access Act. That allows students to gather, and they can engage in religious activities, praying or discussing religion, and they can even invite adults to participate. But one adult cannot make repeated regular visits or lead the effort. So that's, of course, exactly what they're doing. How do they get adults to start leading these efforts? they bring them under the wolf's, the sheepskin, I guess, disguise of being mentors and helping the school. And they're even getting these people in the school to say, to respond by saying, oh, we're so happy you're in schools because you're reinforcing all the values we want to reinforce. Well, you know, if they ever actually read the tenets of these religions, whether it's Christianity or the Muslim religion, they would realize that, no, you don't want people to subscribe to religion, because that religion is all based on the ideas of a kingdom, of laws that are immutable, the concepts that we value so much in our society, such as civil rights, the democratic processes, liberties, and freedoms, are the antithesis of what Christianity teaches. It teaches that the world is a kingdom, that certain people are ordained by some God to run the show indefinitely, and we have no say in the matter. So if they really understood what their religion was, they would reject it wholesale, because it is so destructive to progress, to liberties, to rights, and to the advancement of the overall human condition.
Yeah, I think one of the crimes of religion is that it teaches us, or attempts to teach us, that the universe is a system of rewards and punishments, just like human culture is a system of rewards and punishments. Life on Earth certainly is a system just like that, but the cosmos itself is totally indifferent to your welfare and well-being. It's immoral in the sense that it has no mercy, and it has it's pitiless, but it really has no particular reason to dislike anyone. It's totally random. So that's the way nature works, but religion says, no, it's a matter of rewards and punishments, and you need to perform certain acts of obedience, among other things, in order to earn these rewards. And in fact, luckily there are people who can intercede on your behalf in order to make life better in the here and now and in the hereafter. Of course, they need to be paid in order,
handsomely,
in order to carry on this work. And that's really the entire conflict. I think it is an entire point of view that says you can be rewarded in the hereafter. That's simply not the case. There are no rewards in the hereafter. There is only the here and now. I forget who it was made this analogy, but I'm going to quote it again anyway, because as I understand it, the entire proposition that most religions offer you is the same proposition that the mafia offers its customers, which is, you know, it looks like you're having a really nice life here. It would be a shame if something came along and fucked it all up for you.
Well, religion operates by inventing the disease in the first place, right? We're all horrible people, we're sinners, because of the natural reactions that we have to being human.
Sure, then it wants to sell you the cure.
Which, coincidentally, never seems to work, right? Because we are eternally filled with guilt.
Well, nevertheless, you're still supposed to be grateful for having been poisoned and then sold the antidote.
So, so it's it's a self-perpetuating issue when they can, or disease when they can compel people to subscribe to it. Those of us in the community of reason understand that having the kind of natural impulses we have as humans is the whole reason the species survived, and that applies to every other species. We aren't doing anything wrong when we follow our natural instincts. Now we're in this political season, right? This political contest going on in the middle of 2016, and we see that politicians are trying to advance their own agenda by instilling fear of the people who subscribe to the other religions. So we're being told that we can't bring these people from these devastated, war-torn areas in the Middle East into our country, because inevitably they're all going to want to kill us, right? We don't even know these people. We've never met them. They only want to get out of the areas they're in because they know if they stay there, they and their entire families will be killed. But it's an easy distinction to draw because they're members of the wrong religion. We don't need to look at them as humans anymore, as people who want to be able to raise their families and be able to provide for their families and get them educated and so on. All we see is they're the wrong religion, they're hostile toward us, we've got to keep them out. And so we see that, alluding to what you were saying earlier, religion becomes a divisive element, not anything that actually brings the whole human family together to be able to progress toward a better life for more people.
Well, that's the whole purpose of that sort of propaganda or that sort of teaching, is to persuade one group of people that another group of people or groups of peoples are less human than the original group of people. And that's what gives us things like persecution and wars
and of course genocide, right? Because that traces back to the roots of this country.
And everything right up to that.
The native people didn't have souls. They were expendable. They were in the way just like a herd of buffalo. Just go out and kill them all. It didn't matter that we had treaties with them because they weren't real people, because they weren't Christians and they didn't have this teaching and they had no place in heaven.
Bring back a scalp so you could collect the bounty.
Exactly. So things haven't really changed too much, have they, Joe? Because we still have that same fear. Let's take just a moment to tell our audience about who we are, Atheists of Florida, bringing you the Atheist Forum. We're headquartered in Tampa. We have membership throughout the state of Florida. We publish newsletters like this. And there are many benefits to being a member, which I won't bother to go through now, but you'll find them back here on the back page of our newsletter. We publish these frequently to tell everybody what we're up to. Among other things, we put out the Atheist Forum and have been for quite a few years. We have monthly meetings and really find that most people who contact us say almost literally, verbatim, the same thing. They want to be around people who are like-minded. And so it probably goes back to the foundation of why the organization was formed, because atheists among each other really understand that they're not going to be pressured into joining a church. They're not going to be around people who are trying to convince them to subscribe to religious ideologies. They've had enough of it in their lives, and they just want to be with people who also reject all these ancient superstitions, and they think they find a group of people that they can get along with much better. So if you would like to learn more about the organization, you can visit our website, contact us at AOF.NGO, and you can learn about all the things that we do and the history of the organization and so on. In the meantime, let's get back to our appraisal of the situation in the public school system. When this fellow was found to be proselytizing in the system, the school board reacted within 1 or 2 days to sit up and take note. Same old thing. As long as nobody's complaining, they keep inching their way into the system, a little more each time, to see just how far they can get. How many students can they start proselytizing to? And once somebody complained, then they had to stand back and recognize that, no, this is inappropriate. The person who filed the complaint is unknown to us, probably due to concern for repercussions. The person who made the complaint remained anonymous and used this national organization to actually bring the issue to the attention of the school board. Because let's face it, if it was, say it was an assistant coach or one of the players or another teacher, they would worry about dealing with repercussions from the system that is actually endorsing this and turning a blind eye to this kind of proselytation, because they think it's good. They think it's good for students to be taught about these religions, and they can't do it. They know they can't do it. Let's face it, students in school, due to the truancy laws, they're by legal mandate, and that gives them their opportunity to capture these kids in ways they otherwise couldn't. So they want to take advantage of the system that is supposed to protect them from that kind of proselytizing, any more than we'd allow Muslims to come in and do it. You can just imagine if a group of women with towels over their head came into the school one day and said, you know, we want to help kids read a little bit better. Would you let us in?
You don't have to imagine it. It's happening in various places in the country where The Muslims are wanting access to the schools. They've got prayer rooms in Flint. I think the college has its own prayer room, the high schools and such. It's the nature, again, of the business of religion. It's what they're set up to do. They have this huge and effective machine that's been grinding out business since day one. And what it does is raise money and increase membership. That's all that they do. You know, religions don't produce anything. It's not as if you can go down to the church and buy a quart of milk or get a new car. I mean, I know that like Amana makes refrigerators. That's a religious sect, but they're few and far between. The point is that they're basically, as I said earlier, parasitic. They depend on charity to exist. Naturally, they'd be in favor of charity, at least charity for them. Since that's what they do, in order to exist, they're going to keep right on doing it, and so we can look forward to fighting this battle forever.
Well, let me ask you this, though, Joe. Do you think that these major religions among the world, mainly the Western religions, I guess I would frame the question that way, are beginning to feel threatened by the intrusion of the internet, whereby people in, under age 10 can start to explore any questions that they have about religion, whereas 100 years ago, when they lived in a small town, everybody went to church. They couldn't question it to anybody. They'd be chastised for even doubting in any way or questioning any way what they were being taught. So do you think this is leading to serious concerns on the part of the religions that they're going to start losing their flock and, of course, their income?
Particularly the mainstream religions, their numbers have been dwindling for decades now. And they see the writing on the wall. And as their numbers shrink and as their revenues shrink, and hopefully we can get rid of some of these tax exemptions, which are both illegal and immoral in my estimation, their power to influence public opinion and to influence public officials will wane likewise with their numbers and their revenues, which is why they'll, as I said a minute ago, we can look forward to fighting this battle for as long as we're drawing breath, I'm pretty sure. And the more we win, of course, the more desperate they'll become. They're not going to give up $1 trillion cash cow without a fight,
right.
Ed. And at some point, it will no longer be a matter of reason. It will be, well, we're all agents of the devil, and we cause things like September 11th. We cause things like Katrina. We cause things like AIDS and
the breakdown of the family,
and
premarital sex.
It's just a matter of time before the real religious powers start appealing to their faithful flock to do something more effective about the decline in their numbers and revenue, and about Satan making inroads into our society. And heaven help us when we find out what more effective turns out to be.
Yeah, and I think also it's difficult for religions to accommodate change, which is inevitable, and as the human family moves down the road, they're locked into subscribing to a book that really considered all females to be chattel and the property of men, a book that again says that all governments should be founded as kingdoms instead of as democracies, and that institutions like civil liberties and freedoms don't exist. That's, of course, why women didn't have the right to vote or own property or businesses or get an education in this country. Some of these talk show hosts, the conservative show hosts, will say it over and over again that our country was founded in the principles of Christianity. They're alluding that what the founding fathers wanted was to create this country as a theocracy, and they grope for any little morsel that will support that. My response to them is, yeah, we did have a lot of Christian principles. including the treatment of women, the treatment of the native peoples, slavery, and we've been able to wean ourselves away from those horrible principles because of that nasty piece of paper they got up in Washington called the Constitution, which is always getting in their way. It's as simple as this. The Founding Fathers wanted to create a theocracy. Why didn't they make that the first sentence of the Constitution? The United States is formed as a Christian theocracy, and all of our laws will be based on interpretation of the King James Bible. Instead, what did they say in the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. What could be clearer? Why are we still having this argument? And yet they persist, and I think it's because they feel threatened. They see this threat that people understand that, no, we don't base our laws and our values and the treatment of women on what's in the Bible.
It gives them more excuses to belly up to the public trough as well, because, God wants the U.S. To prosper, and we need faith-based initiatives, and we need all kinds of federal funds and private schools in order to make sure that the country does continue to prosper, that it doesn't become cursed because of atheist scum such as ourselves.
Yes. But what about in the Middle East, Joe? Do you think there's much hope for them? I still look at the treatment of women and this movement by ISIL and ISIS to come in and just dominate these entire regions with 8th century medievalist laws, and they're making people live that way. How are they ever going to progress out of these primitive ideologies that they're having imposed on them?
Well, I think that oil specifically and business in general will cure the fundamentalist Muslim problem. They can't survive without oil, at least in the Middle East. I know that most Muslims don't live in the Middle East, but it certainly is the linchpin for the more radical movements are oil funded. And the other is you can't do business in countries where people are blowing you up. And if you look at World War II, there were sections of Germany that the U.S. didn't bomb because they were owned by U.S. corporate interests. So they didn't bomb those parts of the city necessarily, at least not on purpose. And trade and commerce has always been a cure or a palliative for international hostilities. Look at all the countries that we've been at internecine war with the Germans and the Japanese and the British, and they're all our friends.
Vietnam now.
And
yeah,
Vietnam,
right.
they're
And
all our close friends.
soon
Why?
to be Cuba.
Why? Because we're doing business together.
Right.
And I think that the internet and the common immutable laws of business will solve this problem ultimately, and that lots of Muslims will drop out of the faith, and that the theologians themselves will find workarounds to the text, just like I don't know anybody that wants to kill anybody for working on Sunday in this country.
That's right. In fact, right now over in, I believe in Pinellas County, there is talk about changing the blue laws that restrict the time that liquor purchases can be made on Sunday. It's just it's a textbook blue law. There's absolutely no logic to it. It's strictly an emotional law that's a carryover from the days when the idea was that everybody was supposed to be sober on Sunday morning so they could get their dead ass into church and try to stay awake in the pew, wasn't it?
Back in 1965, around there, give or take a year, a club on 34th Street in St. Pete called the Blue Room. And it was very popular. It was jammed every night, live bands and dancing and music. Everybody wanted. And then one Sunday, the police came over and arrested the bartender and the manager for dancing on Sunday. It was an ordinance against that in St. Petersburg. And they arrested them, took them off to jail. In fact, they came out the next Sunday and arrested them again for the same reason. And so, not to digress too far, but they did sue the city because there was an ordinance that only the county sheriff could have green and white cars and uniforms, and the St. Petersburg police had green and white cars and uniforms. They didn't want to have to change them all, so they changed that ordinance, and they changed the one about dancing on Sundays, too.
So soon we might see that those blue laws are finally done away with once and for all. It may take
Wasn't that long
another
ago, and
decade.
it wasn't that far away.
And it's back to the same thing you said. It's money. Over in Pinellas County, which for those who are geographically challenged is on the coast, the bars were allowed to open at 1 o'clock on Sunday. In 11 o'clock. And in Hillsborough, they were still required to be closed until 1 o'clock. So on these sporting days on Sunday, when these football games would start, well, the fans would want to get to a bar where they could start seeing the pregame programs that would start at, I guess, about 11 o'clock or noon and start slamming beers. So the people, the fans were going over to Pinellas County to prop themselves up on a bar stool and watch all this pregame activity for the 1 o'clock kickoff. Well, what do you think the bartenders and the bar owners in Hillsborough County had to complain about? It had nothing to do with ethics or religion or morality or any of that stuff. We're losing business. You got to change the law to help us. And they did, because money trumps everything in a capitalist society.
Money can always wait. You know, you may lose the issue this time, but money
Sure.
will still be around 10 years from now with the same issue.
And now, of course, tourists come down here from civilized states and think, well, why can't I have, a mimosa on Sunday morning with my brunch? Oh, well, you're supposed to be at church. I'm on vacation. I don't want to go to church.
There was a lot of really negative feedback from the bars at the airport being closed on Sunday, and the travelers couldn't get a drink. And that was another big factor in them doing away or changing the blue laws.
And how, if I'm
Hillsborough County.
serving a drink on Sunday, does it force you or any religious person to have a drink? Just don't do it, right? It's fine. Do what you want. We do what we want. Everybody's happy. But it's that, I think it goes back to that same concept that, wherever religion has been able to get its claws sunk in, they don't want to lose their grip. And so they're the ones that keep fighting it. But they are losing their grip because, again, the dollar always trumps ethics, doesn't it?
And this too shall change.
Yes.
Well, do you think we've done just about enough to advance the causes of atheism in a single evening? I think
I do. I'd like to invite any of our viewers to, again, investigate our website and find out more about Atheists of Florida. If you have questions, comments, or insults about the program, you can reach us through the website, and we'd be glad to read them back on future programs. So we'll leave it at that and invite you to join us again here on the Atheist Forum along with Joe Reinhardt. I'm Ed Golly, reminding you that if the story's a little bit too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Maybe a little bit.
It's nice when you watch the clock.